Let's get freaky. More about this and other stories on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
A mini RF modulator.
I'm a freak. I'm a weirdo.
Atari is back. Again.
And the Mega65 sells out.
All this, plus our community question of the week on This Week in Retro.
Up-to-date news
for out-of-date tech.
Neil, if there's one thing that our subreddit users never tire of, it's mini consoles.
Oh, yeah.
Every time one is released, it's always one of our most upvoted stories on Reddit. Now, why do you think that is?
Oh, I don't know, John, but I think mini consoles is the content that our listeners crave. It's what they tune in for. I'm almost at the point now of thinking we should rename the podcast and just dedicate it to nothing but, mini consoles. This week in mini consoles, that's what we are.
Maybe so. Well, for all lovers of gaming in miniature, this is your week because we've got a big story coming up here. Now, just to set this up, one thing most gamers of a certain age have in common is memories of not only their favorite console, but the television set it was connected to. Now, Neil, I know you've mentioned Big Telly before, but as we all know, that was only put into use for gaming on special occasions. What was your daily driver CRT you used for computing back in the day?
Oh, you can't mention Big Telly and not have me talk about Big Telly. I love Big Telly. Big Telly was very much an 80s and 90s thing, early 90s thing, because when I went into my PC owning days, I did have a dedicated PC monitor. In fact, in my earliest days, I had a dedicated monitor because I had the Amstrad CPC, which came with a monitor. That was one of the big attractions of it. But in that middle period, in my Amiga owning days, for my Amiga, I had a Matsui 14-inch portable TV. Have you ever heard of Matsui?
No, never.
No, I'm not surprised. It was an own brand that was sold by the Dixons group on the high street. So Curry's, Dixons, places like that here in the UK. Mm-hmm. And they chose to use the name Matsui for their own brand because they thought it sounded nice and a bit mystical and foreign sounding. They wanted it to sound Japanese.
A common marketing ploy. Haagen-Dazs is the same thing.
Yeah, right. Exactly that. Yeah. We get that over here. Yeah. So, they also had a similar brand called Seisho or Seisho, however you pronounce that one. I can't remember now, but for exactly the same reasons. So they were piggybacking on the advanced manufacturing capabilities that we knew Japanese electronics manufacturers had in the day, the reliability that we associated with them then, and a funny sounding name was all the fashion. So my daily driver on my Amiga was a Matsui CRT, 14-inch one. And then downstairs, of course, we had Big Telly. And we had two distinct Big Tellys that I can think of. The first was a really classic 70s-looking beast with a wooden case. And it had the chunky pop in and out radio buttons on the front.
Oh, yeah.
I think we had 4, which was a luxury, because before whatever date Channel 4 came around, we just had the 3 channels. I don't ever remember 2 channels. I'm not that old, but I remember 3 and then 4 channels on the front there. And then my dad upgraded to a 21-inch. It was a Mitsubishi TV, and it was plastic, and it was black, and it looked like the future. None of this wood grain nonsense. And crucially, it had a SCART socket, which I thought was amazing. So, the Amiga looked incredible when I went from the RGB out to the SCART socket instead of using RF as I had done before. And I've just got great memories. I won't go into detail because I've talked about it on the show before, but really fond memories of Saturday daytime kickoff 2 tournaments on Big Telly with my brother. It felt like we were peak gaming back then. We had everything. We had the 21-inch telly, we had a cutting-edge Amiga, 2-player football game. I wanted for nothing, John. It was great times on Big Telly. So, but if we go across the pond to you, we always got to watch American sitcoms where everyone had a 50-foot cable on their telephone. The telephone was on the wall in the kitchen. You could walk around the entire house with the cable following you. You had that, right? You must have done.
Oh, we did not, but that is not just a TV thing. I did know people that did have 50-foot cables on their phone. I don't know why people always insisted on, I guess when the house was built, that was where the phone was decided to be put in, because you couldn't choose where to put the jack, but everybody had a phone in their kitchen.
Okay.
Lots of people did have those giant cables. They would walk into the bathroom, talking on the phone. It was
Yeah.
like, have your it's just the way it was, Neil.
I'm thinking about Roseanne in particular. They were always on the phone with the great big cable walking around the house. And then also everyone in America, according to the stereotype that I watched on the telly, had a big telly, bigger than my big telly. We're talking enormous telly. Does that fit the stereotype?
Lots of people, I don't know if you know this about Americans, Neil, but we are fond of the old television here in this country. In my house, we had, I think it was a 32-inch television growing up for the majority of my youth, elementary school age. And we had an older one that I think my mom picked up at a garage sale. It was also a 32-inch TV, but this thing was, it was right out of your late 70s, early 80s marketing material. It was made to look like a piece of furniture. So it had the brass handles on the bottom that made you think there were drawers under it. But those, of course, were just for show. That actually really annoyed me because there was all kinds of room in the body of this thing. You could have put real drawers in there. That would have been a perfect place to store games and controllers and stuff in. But anyway, we used that TV until the tube was so dim it was hardly visible anymore.
And there was a tube, was there? This wasn't rear projection. This was
no, this was a tube. Well, we never had a rear projection TV, although I did have friends that had them, and they were so massive. And it's so funny to think about today. Those rear projection televisions are pretty much the default size of a normal flat screen TV, but because of the girth that were needed, when you got rid of one of these things, it was like burying a family member in terms of the amount of weight and heft that this thing occupied in your house. But these days TVs are so cheap, they're so replaceable. I don't think that today's gamers will form the same attachment, but for classic gamers, these memories are real, and that's why I think this particular mini console will be a big hit. This really isn't a mini console at all. I think we've delved fully into micro territory. It's Super Impulse is the manufacturer. They've made their business producing soda can size arcade machine replicas, and they've turned their attention to the home market console for the first time, and they've produced a fully working finger length sized Atari 2600. So hold out your pointer finger. That's as big as this thing is. It's bundled with Pac-Man, Combat, Asteroids, Warlords, Centipede, Breakout, Tempest, Missile Command, Millipede, and Pong. So lots of Atari 2600 classics. Now, keep in mind, these are all the 2600 versions of these games. So Pac-Man will look just as much a flickery mess as you
I was going to say, you're not selling it to me with Pac-Man. The first game that you mentioned, why would I want that?
Right. But that's not all, Neil. As part of the bundle, they've also included a period-correct miniature television set, complete with aerial antenna, and get ready for this, a mini RF modulator. Are you ready for a micro RF modulator in your life, Neil?
Oh, wow. We've joked about minis having RF modulators in the past. Is this an actual working RF modulator, or is this just a fun little mock-up?
I believe that this is, you do have to, I think it connects through the RF modulator. I don't believe that it actually modulates the signal. I don't think you have to mess with any of the tiny screws on the top of your TV to get this to work. But I did think that was, that was a nice realistic touch there. Now, because of the tiny size of everything, the TV screen itself is only 1.5 inches wide. So, this is an eye strain inducing experience to play this thing. But they did think of making the actual screen inside the plastic TV set tiltable to various angles. So it will make playing it a little bit more comfortable. But this is definitely something that's going to be more at home on a shelf as a display piece than something you're going to put hours into playing, at least if you value your eyesight.
Yeah, it's not the size, is it? It's the angle. Thank goodness they've let you tilt it so you can play more comfortably. Come on, that's just silly. That's ridiculous. 1.5 inches, that to me is it's a nice display chirruping away on a shelf in the corner of your room. You can see it working away. It's an ornament, basically.
Right.
But I'm guessing through the RF modulator, which is actually composite or whatever it is, that you can actually plug this thing into a full-size telly if you want to. Can you do that?
I don't think so, Neil. I don't think they built that functionality in. Like you said, I think that this is meant to be something that you place on the desk in front of you, and you flip it on and put on the attract mode for your favorite game, and you just look at it and it makes you feel happy. I think that's the extent of this thing.
You put your Sylvanian family rabbit in front of the cabinet or the console and leave it to play. Yeah.
Right.
I'm looking forward to the day in like 40 years time when I'm an old man, older than I am now, when you buy the Sunday paper and you get the magazine supplement inside, and on the back, instead of having the ornamental Royal Prince Charles plate for sale, you have like the miniature consoles, and we go, oh yeah, I've got to get that ornament, I've got to add that to my collection, and we just go around dusting our mini consoles.
Yeah, I think we're not far away from that, Neil. I can't imagine the Franklin Mint, who is the makers of fine, ceremonial plates from TV shows like Bonanza and Little House on the Prairie. At some point, all the people that are into that stuff are going to pass into the next life, and we'll be left with us. And and there will be, I guarantee you, we are going to see things on the scale of your decorative plates dedicated to retro gaming. Absolutely.
Yeah. If my grandchildren touch my mini Outrun, they'll be hell to pay. Just step away, children.
Right.
So what's the damage, John? How much does this thing cost us?
Well, right now, the whole piece of kit is going to debut in Target stores. Do you have Target in England, Neil?
I want to say yes, but a limited number. I'm really not certain on that. Maybe one of our listeners can tell us. I'm certainly aware of the brand, and I think like Target might own one of the big stores over here, and they might have Target sections. I don't know. Any listeners out there, tell us, do we have Target in the UK?
Well, they're going to debut in Target stores first, starting next month, and they'll retail at $35. I'm not going to lie, Neil. I'm kind of tempted by this thing. $35 is not a whole lot. I love the idea of including a TV in the bundle, and I think it would look great right here on the This Week in Retro set right behind me, on the Amiga 1000 monitor that's right behind me here. So if you're interested in checking it out, be sure to click the link in the show notes, and thank you to subreddit user Pajako6502 for sharing the story with us.
Okay, John, so the next article that I've picked from our subreddit, it's less of a news story and more of an opinion piece and a thinking exercise, a nostalgic thinking exercise back to our youth. Nice chance to reminisce, and it's thanks to listener Reading Glasses Man, definitely a listener of ours with a name like that, hitting the demographic with his reading glasses on there.
Oh, yeah.
He refers to a podcast that's called Geek Bits Podcast. Geek Bits. And in that podcast, on an episode, they discuss their experiences as grown up as kids who were into computers back in the day, and how at high school, a high school comprising of about 500 children, there were only 4 or 5 that they could identify as geeks or nerds and were into computers like them. And it really got me thinking about my own experiences here in the UK, because while very few of my friends were really, really into computers in the way that I was, they all had exposure in some form or another to computers, usually because we had computers in schools, thanks to the computer literacy project that we had here in the 80s. So we had BBC Micros in most of our classrooms for people of my generation. They were always around, but that doesn't mean they were all into computers. They were just aware and familiar with computers and what they could do. So from my own experience at school, there were probably only about 2 or 3 other kids who I could visit outside of school and properly get geeky with, the kids that I would sit with, and they would show me their 286 and we talk about, well, how have you partitioned your drives? You've got a 4 gig limit. Where do you put all your games? How many partitions have you got? How many drives have you got? All of this
real
stuff,
talk.
Yeah. When did you last defrag? All of that great talk.
I've never even kissed a girl.
So there were those, and then there were the kids with the Master Systems and the consoles who, they could be massive gamers into their games, but I wouldn't class them as geeky computer nerds because they weren't even thinking about what you could do with a computer. They were just thinking about the latest and greatest games. And thinking back about all of this stuff, I never really considered myself or this behavior to be weird. Not at all. And then Reading Glasses Man cites his own examples on the comments that he left us. Something that he did back in the day was when people were listening to Madonna or Metallica, he was playing tapes of C64 loading screen music that he'd captured, and he was just playing them on his hi-fi.
Yeah.
And I thought, yeah, well, you've said yes. So I think you're nodding there as if that's an experience maybe you had too.
I definitely played tapes of video game music instead of listening to what was popular when I was growing up. Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was thinking instead of playing, obviously I did play some music, but I would often just let my Amiga play mega demos and blast the music out in my room instead of putting a tape on. And then a little later, I would actually put tapes of those Amiga demos in my car and listen to them when I was first driving in the late 90s. If you haven't listened to the Outrun soundtrack while you're driving along a coast road as the sun sets, then have you even ever driven, John? What you even do?
I know.
Yeah.
I know. They need to include that soundtrack with every new vehicle sold.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but despite these behaviors, I don't ever remember a time where I felt like I needed to hide my geekiness or be ashamed of it in any way, or in fear of repercussions for being geeky, for being that classic high school nerd that you see in the films that gets beaten up and has their head flushed down the toilet. Never ever felt any of that at all. So that it was nice to just spend some time reflecting on my own experiences and think back to how I was then. How about you, John? Were you comfortable in yourself with your geekiness? Did you consider yourself to be a weird kid that was into computing?
I considered to be myself. I definitely always considered myself to be a weird kid, for sure. But it wasn't really because of the gaming aspect. First of all, even though I had, and I'm talking about this is really, pretty much all through school until I became immersed in the classic computer scene just a couple of years ago. I wasn't really that into computers. I was always one of those console people like you were talking about. I was into Nintendo, Neil. I didn't tell anybody I had an Atari computer because nobody cared. I didn't even care. Nintendo was life, and life was Nintendo, and everybody was into it, especially when I was in elementary school, middle school. Boys, girls, popular kids, unpopular kids. It was a global phenomenon, the likes of which I don't think we'll ever see again, because it was just such a big thing, and it was the first new thing that really took off in video games for people of my generation. So, no, Neil, my geekiness was defined by something else, and that was my love of Star Trek. It may shock you to believe, Neil, that when you walk up to somebody and tell them you're real into Star Trek, they don't always greet you with positivity. This was definitely something only a few select kids were into. And those kids were my friends. And Neil, we definitely fit a demographic.
Yeah, that is a stereotype that often fits, isn't it? The Trekkie. How far have you gone with your Trekkiness? Have you been to?
When I was middle school. Middle school was the height of my Trekkiness. Okay. In high school, I joined the marching band, and I furthered my my geekiness education and and bona fides by joining the marching band. But when I was in middle school, I was part of a Star Trek club that met in the school library at lunch. We would each assign each other a role to play. For example, I was a lieutenant commander, and we would act out episodes of the show. We would LARP in the library, Neil. LARPing in the library.
So when those worlds collided, video games and Star Trek, as they did so often, that must have blown your mind. That must have been...
Oh, yeah. Being able to control these people but it's funny you mention that, because I say that on one hand it was cool, but on the other hand it made you realize that video games could never take the place. And this is why still to this day I enjoy tabletop role playing, is that video games can never beat the theater of the mind, especially when you get together with people and you're acting out things in sort of a role playing scenario. Video games can never approach that, but if you're by yourself and you're looking for entertainment, then that's the way to go.
Makes me want to go down another avenue of where could video games go if you brought AI in that could actually get somewhere close to, as you say, the
Right.
theater of the mind rather than a linear plot. Where could video games take us? Something we might talk about in 40 years' time when it's retro. Maybe it will come around. But getting back on track, I mean, you described the Nintendo Entertainment System there as being a global phenomenon, which it was. I'm not doubting that. But here in the UK, it was popular and it was here. But I only knew one kid with a NES. I definitely knew more people with Nintendo hardware when we came into the Super Nintendo era. But that's just my neighborhood, which isn't a great sample size. So I don't think you can draw anything too authoritative from that. Something I have been playing with this week is the ColecoVision from 1982. And it has really surprised me what a quality console that is. I don't think it produced a lot of good games, but I don't think it nearly met its potential, given that it vanished off the back of the video game crash.
Well, Coleco is yet another example of a video game company that put all of its chips in on the let's make a home computer pile, and that was the death of their company. They were the same company that produced the Cabbage Patch Kids. Were those a thing in England, Neil?
Oh yeah, we had the Cabbage Patch Dolls and also the Garbage Pail Kids.
Yeah. So the Cabbage Patch Kids, they produced some of the earliest sort of, store rushes where people would just, duel to the death to get these things for their kids for Christmas. And so Coleco had all the money in the world. They produced this ColecoVision. They nailed down some great arcade licenses. Some of the best arcade ports you can play on any, first, second gen system are on the ColecoVision. And then they went all in and produced this computer called the Atom, Neil. And the Atom was the death of them because it came along at the same time that the whole crash happened. So people gave up sort of hope on these video game systems. But at the same time, they made some really poor marketing decision or design decisions, such as you must have the printer plugged in to use the Atom, and the power supply is built into the printer. So
built into the dot matrix printer, and they also pumped a huge amount of money into an add-on for the ColecoVision to turn it into an Atom, which never really quite worked. So anyway, we're going off on another tangent here, bringing it back into your geekiness, your trekkiness, your Bandcamp, and everything else. You talked about your love of Nintendo and the NES. How far did that go? Did you ever have a Nintendo backpack at school or a cap or anything like that to share your love of Nintendo to the world?
Not for lack of trying. Unlike today, where you can go to any number of stores at the mall and buy, Nintendo merchandise. We have a store called Hot Topic here, and all they sell is retro stuff that my students, Neil, were born. My youngest students, I believe, were born in 2005 or 2006, something like that. And no. They're much younger than that, actually. They're 11 years. And so no, they were born in like 2008, 2009 because they're like 11 years old. Wow. So they
You're not the maths teacher, then.
They have no recollection of anything related to the 8-bit era, but they continue to wear Nintendo branded stuff, NES branded stuff. This stuff sells like hotcakes, I think, in a lot of the same way that when we were kids, people would wear Led Zeppelin shirts and stuff like that. And so but when I was growing up, Nintendo hadn't realized the potential in putting their logo on every conceivable thing. At least, nothing that I ever saw in stores, because if I had, I would have definitely snapped all that stuff up, but it just didn't exist back then.
I remember really desiring the few Psygnosis games that bundled t-shirts, like Shadow of the Beast. There was like a deluxe pack with a Shadow of the Beast t-shirt. But I remember thinking, I really want this, but I'd never wear this outside. I would never show the world my love of Psygnosis and Shadow of the Beast.
You're also rolling the dice. Are you the same size as the t-shirt? Because you don't get a choice. It comes with a bundled t-shirt, and if it doesn't fit you, you're out of luck. You can wear it as sort of, maybe an apron if it's too big, or a winter cap if it's too small.
Yeah, I would wear it with pride now, but back then I would be far too self-conscious about what people might think of me. So, anyway, what I would say then was that computing almost felt more accessible to me in the 8-bit era, because you were taught what computers were in the classroom, and you were taught that they were here to be programmed, and programming is how you make computers do things. And, we were taught that even as young kids. But when we moved to upper school and computers had GUIs, flash GUIs and WYSIWYG applications and Office applications and all of this stuff, any exposure that we had to computers in school became more about the specific task in hand, like learning to use a word processor or a spreadsheet application, rather than learning what a computer is about and how it works and what you can do with it. And I felt like it was uncoupled from the wider curriculum. So where in the past we might have used something like Logo to support a maths lesson and do cool programming tasks, it just became detached and less cool to my peers and more abstract. You were just word processing, you were just using it as a tool. And I can imagine if I was 10 years younger, and maybe this applies to the kids that you teach now, I would have been a lot less inspired by computing in schools and perhaps would never have been quite so inquisitive about their inner workings if it was just all about the applications. You have a computer lab in your school? Is that still a thing these days, or did the kids just pull out laptops and tablets?
Up until the pandemic, we absolutely had computer labs because my school district is famous for its thriftiness. And while the neighboring counties received iPads or Chromebooks or laptops of different sorts, our county, we just kept going with our traditional computer labs. But after the pandemic, when virtual learning had to appear, the laptops appeared in the hands of the students, so we no longer have computer labs. But every student does carry a laptop with them. I'm fully convinced that 95% of their time on the laptop is spent playing Minecraft, because that's the game that is installed on all the laptops. But as far as I'm aware, we do have a digital technology class where students are, in theory, shown about, taught about the inner workings of computers and introduced to programming and things like that. But I think that programming now is more about doing things within existing applications than programming things from scratch. And I think you see that all the way up to the top. As when you have games here, you're almost always programming in Unity rather than designing your own engine from the ground up. That isn't nearly as common, and I think that trickles all the way down to the student level, whether they're designing levels in Minecraft or Roblox and things like that. I think that students are still interested in programming and content creation. I just think that the way that they go about it is several steps up from creating everything from scratch from a text parser.
Yeah, and if I take my old man nostalgic hat off, it has to be that way. If you want to achieve the things you want on a modern computer, flashy graphics and all of the rest of it, there'd be so much involved to program that from scratch that you have to have these these engines to help you, and things like scratch coding where you can just drag and drop blocks to help you achieve what you want to achieve. So I don't begrudge it. If you look at the kids at your school and you think about how many kids are really, really into computing, like the real geeky computer nerds who want to stay after school and program and all the rest of it, is it still like 4 or 5 kids like it was back in my day, or do you see more?
Well, it's really hard to know because you don't have to go to a specific location to be into that stuff anymore. So it's hard to pin the nerds down. It's harder than it used to be, where you could just kind of lurk outside the AV room after school and see who went in. Then you could tell. These days, it's hard to know who's into anything because as soon as school is over, everybody goes home and they conduct all of their socialization. They conduct all of their programming. Everything that they do is in a virtual environment where everybody is siloed off. And that's just sort of the consequence of, number one, the pandemic, but also number two, just how easy it is for everybody to just stay home and get, the satisfaction that they formerly got doing things in groups with people, doing all those things by themselves now.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'd be interested to know your thoughts, dear listeners. Were you geeks? Were you bullied for being into computers? Did the cool kids lock you in the stationery cupboard? Did you, like me, get blamed when some kid put what was it called? The Anarchist's Cookbook. Somebody bought that in on the school network at one point. And because I was the kid that was into computers, I got the blame. It took me a long, long time to talk my way out of that because it was nothing to do with me, but I had the reputation for being the kid that was into computers.
Can you imagine the trouble that you get into now? I mean, obviously they had no way to tie that to you, but the amount of trouble that you'd get into if a student was found with a recipe for bombs and things like that in their locker, it would be a major, major deal here in the United States. Of course, back then it was a different time, and I'm glad you were able to talk your way out of it, Neil. That's good.
Well, it was just deny, deny, deny. It was nothing to do with me because it was nothing to do with me. But yeah, this was a pre 9/11 era. It would be a very different situation now if that happened, I'm sure. But yeah, leave your comments in the subreddit on the story that's been left by Reading Glasses Man. And also check out the link to Geek Bits podcast to hear their thoughts and hear their conversation about the same topic. It's been interesting to think about, John.
Neil, when you think Atari 1980, what do you think of?
Oh, I think of booming home console sales, cutting edge arcade machines, just, peak Atari goodness. It's a good time for them, surely.
Me too. Now, when you think of Atari 2021, what do you think of?
Well, this is quite fresh in my mind because I was on Twitter yesterday, and I don't know if you've noticed at the top of the app now, if there are group like live chats happening, suddenly a link appears and you can click on it to listen in. I've only noticed this recently. And there was a live chat happening last night about Atari with Nolan Bushnell in there. And they were talking about NFTs. They were talking about crypto. They were talking about partitioning famous Atari franchises so that everybody could buy a little piece of it and profit off of it when the next game is made and all this stuff. And they were talking about everything except for making games. And I think that's what I think about now when I think about Atari. Get your head back into making games because you're talking about everything but. I
mean, has there ever in the history of the world been a video game brand that has just sold itself out as much as Atari? I mean, you've got the Atari logo on speaker hats, slot machines. Of course, we talked about their future hotel chain, all the NFT stuff. It's definitely come a long, long way from a simple video game company who was responsible for some of the most visionary games of the early 80s. Well, Atari has a new CEO, Neil, and he wants to change things up a little, and in a good way. According to a new interview from GamesIndustry.biz, Wade Rosen is looking to pivot Atari away from some of the ventures that some might say have cheapened the Atari brand over the years.
Now, John, the irony is not lost on me that just 5 minutes ago you were telling me that if Nintendo put their logo on everything, you'd be all over that. You'd be buying that. And now you're talking Atari down a little bit, going, "Oh, Atari, they're putting their logo on everything."
I'm not saying what they're doing is not a good business decision, because obviously, I mean, I own 2 or 3 Atari shirts that I bought recently. So, hey, I've got nothing against you marketing your brand on non-gaming stuff, but you need to actually support that with the gaming side of things. That's one thing I think Nintendo has done well over the years, is that even though you can buy a Nintendo toothbrush and, a Mario toilet paper dispenser, they still are making good games, and that's the key.
So we've got a new CEO then. Is he setting a new direction? Does this mean no more Atari NFTs? What's the idea?
Let's not get crazy, Neil. Atari would have to be foolish to discontinue their NFT scheme. How else are they going to separate so many fools from their money?
True. So we're at least going to get out of blockchain then. That's going to be crushed.
No, they're keeping that too.
So what's the CEO got to say about himself then? What's going to change here? Well, anything?
They're officially leaving the casino business, Neil. They've had enough. Okay. They've had enough.
Some might argue that's gaming. That was the only gaming they were doing.
That may be the closest thing they had to gaming. I don't know. But what they're doing is, I guess they're siloing all of their side hustles. I mean, their side businesses. So that means that the blockchain people and the NFT people, they'll be separated out from the gaming division. And speaking of their gaming division, I think this is where the most heartening news comes in. According to the interview with Wade, Atari is going to spend its gaming energies less on the free-to-play mobile market, and they're going to put more time and effort into high-quality console and PC releases.
Excellent. Well, for anyone who was just watching there, they would have enjoyed my microphone falling off the stand and me furiously screwing it back on. But we're back now, but back just in time. So IPs then. Atari obviously famous for a lot of classic old games. Are we going to see new IPs? What's the plan there?
Heck no, Neil. This is Atari. They're focused on that almighty back catalog of hits. Now, before you turn the dial to the right and listen to the next podcast, I don't think that this is an entirely bad idea. After all, if you look at some of the hottest indie games of all time, think something like Geometry Wars, Crossy Road, something like that. They're based on gameplay concepts that Atari pioneered. So if Atari can get in there and release high-quality, updated versions of their classic games with some additional modes and quality of life improvements, I think that would actually please almost everybody. After all, wouldn't it be cool to play an updated version of Paperboy, in HD? They've already released a game called Centipede Recharged, which I haven't gotten a chance to play yet, but it looks like from the video it's doing for Centipede what Pac-Man Championship Edition DX did for Pac-Man, where it takes the original concept, it deepens it, but it still provides that same pick up and play fun of the original. Neil, have you had a chance to check out Centipede Recharged yet?
I have. And was Paperboy on the N64 not enough of an HD update for you?
You've just triggered my PTSD, Neil. That's one of the worst remakes of all time.
So yeah, I've seen this game, and it kind of reminds me of that PlayStation 2 and Xbox era where you had arcade remakes. I think you had the Xbox Arcade came in and all of these other things, and it's got that kind of vector style graphics with particles flying all over the place, and everything has a kind of neon fluorescent glow about it, all of the lines and the vectors, and that's not bad. It's just not cutting edge. I've seen a lot of that style before. It works, but it's nothing new. I think the news that you've described with the CEO is pretty good news. But I would say he hasn't gone far enough. I think we've established that. There's nothing wrong with Atari branding being used on hats and T-shirts and pencil cases and all of that good stuff, like you say. But it's got to have some meat on the bone. I think you hit the nail on the head earlier perfectly with your Nintendo example when you said that they really focus on the games and everything else grows out of that. The success grows out of the quality of the games. It's just like Ferrari. The Ferrari badge is on everything. You can buy it on absolutely everything, and it's a prestige brand. If Ferrari suddenly made a people carrier to drop the kids off to school for the price of a Ford, then it would completely devalue that brand, and nobody would be buying those hats. And I think that's what Atari need to focus in on. That's the sensible decision for me. Celebrate the heritage with some remakes, sure, like they've done here. But ditch all of that other nonsense that they were talking about on Twitter last night and that we've seen. Pump money into being a cross-platform modern game publisher. And I know that they were a game publisher for a long time into the modern era. And it didn't work out for them for whatever reason. But the name still carries a huge amount of weight. They need to be thinking about the long term and publishing the games now that will be classic in 40 years' time, like their 40-year-old games are. That's what they need to be focused on, and use the brand and the weight that it has now to attract the developers while it does still have some prestige and have some weight to it, and developers might still want to associate themselves with it. I'm just concerned that like you are, the Atari name is being seriously abused, and I want to see it plucked out of this situation and put in its rightful place. And I think things like NFTs and blockchain and all of that, it just muddies the water about what they're all about. I don't like it, John. I don't know what the solution is other than games, a focus on the games.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem like, we're here again with Atari. They're at a crossroads. They're still a business. They're a business, a big business, trying to stay afloat. But I do find it, heartening that their new CEO is at least making an effort to recover their reputation as a high quality games developer, or at least he's talking about it. Will they succeed? Will this just be another dismal chapter in Atari's history? Only time will tell.
Time will tell. It just feels like they're trying to find a magic bullet. That's how it feels. And I don't think they're going to find it. I think they need the graft, and it's not going to happen with pure luck. let's end the story with something a bit happier now, a success story to end the show. And it's all about the much anticipated Mega65, which was put up for pre-order recently. They set a price of €666.66, which of course is a nod to Steve Jobs and Wozniak's Apple pricing. That works out about $742. The Mega 65, if you don't know, is it's to the Commodore 64 a bit like what the ZX Spectrum Next was to the original ZX Spectrum. It's an imagining of the next version of the machine, what it would have been like with all of the things that superfans might want added to it. Although in the case of this machine, unlike the Spectrum, the Commodore 65, I just naturally want to say Commodore 64. It sounds hard when 5 comes out. The Commodore 65 was a machine that was in development back in the day. So it does take inspiration from those original specs, even though it didn't come to market. In this case, the Mega 65 is more than 40 times faster than the original C64 while maintaining compatibility. It's got a mechanical keyboard. It's got modern enhancements like an SD card and digital video out. So it makes life nice and easy in the modern day. It's got a really gorgeous wedge-shaped case, which is injection molded with the floppy disk drive built into it. And that was not have been cheap to develop. So it's really nice that they've committed to that for the finish. And at its heart is an FPGA chip. And that means updates can be downloaded to improve or change the behavior of the system quite easily. But that FPGA chip would no doubt have added a huge amount to the cost of the system. It's not an insubstantial price to buy these chips. It's certainly worlds away from that $35 Atari 2600 ornament we were talking about. You know, this is for the hardcore. This is not going on your shelf to be looked at. This is not to be used as a daily driver, of course, but when you're putting that kind of money down on it, you should expect to be using it daily for your entertainment or to further your programming skills because you want to develop something for the platform. You know, that's a serious chunk of change to put down to just let gather dust. So you're going to be wanting to use this thing. Now, the good news for the project is that the first batch has sold out. It was 400 units. Which doesn't seem like a lot given the amount of interest that they have in the project. But when you consider the global supply chain issues that are happening at the moment, it really does make production of anything like this a real tightrope to walk on. There are lead times of 20 to 30 weeks on many components, years on some FPGA chips. So I think they've navigated some very rough water as well to get 400 out there. And they are bringing more to market. John, does the Mega 65 appeal to you in any way?
No, not even a little bit. You know, part of the appeal of retro computers to me is, that they're old. They're museum pieces. They're time capsules. They have a patina about them. Maybe they break down a little. Maybe they break down a lot. Using an old computer takes me back to a particular time in a particular place. Even if I was never there before, like whenever I fire up my Amiga 1000 or the Amiga 600, I pretend that I'm a kid, you know, in 1990 in the UK, and I want to fire up the latest game or something like that. You know, it's part of the experience for me is going back in time with these machines. And when you create an alternate future with these machines, I don't have any of that warm fuzzy feeling there now. And paying almost $1,000 for a new computer that kind of looks like an old computer, that just doesn't take me anywhere but to the land of buyer's remorse, Neil.
You know, I'm sure you're not the only one that thinks like that, but there are plenty who have clearly lusted after this device, given how quickly it sold out.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, don't get me wrong. The Commodore 64, I believe, it's definitely the best selling retro computer of all time. And it still might be the best selling computer ever. It's sold tens of millions of units, and the fact that there's 400 people out of those tens of millions that are willing to pay, you know, basically write a blank check for whatever new Commodore machine is released, I think it says more about the law of averages than anything else. But at the same time, I do understand the coolness factor of this thing. It is a very nice looking machine, much like the ZX Next. It's very, very attractive. It's well engineered. If somebody gave me one, I surely wouldn't. I wouldn't turn it away. Just the price tag that this thing is ringing in at makes it a non-starter for me personally. But I fully admit, not being the biggest fan of the C64 as a platform in at all, I'm not the target market for this. But in related, I just can't tell you how much the Mister has killed my excitement for all of these other FPGA products, just like the ZX Next and the Mega 65. I think if the Mister didn't exist, I would be much more enthusiastic about all of these other FPGA products. I mean, with a Mister, you can design and 3D print any case design you want. And at the end of the day, you have the biggest, most popular development platform that's constantly being updated by the brightest minds in the business, who in most cases are doing it for the love of the hobby rather than as part of a profitable business venture. For less than $200, I've got it sitting right here in front of me, a machine that simulates dozens of computers at the flick of a switch and a few button presses. So I just don't need anything else to scratch my retro computing itch. Maybe ever again.
You are presenting here the perfect segue for me to start talking about our own multi-system project there, John, but I'm going to resist.
I was wondering if you were going to take the ball and run with it, Neil.
No, I'm going to resist. It's all about the Mega 65. And I hear what you're saying, but for some people, it's not about jumping around lots of systems. Mm-hmm. It's certainly the perfect system to base this project on, given the sales. I think you're right. I don't think it was until like the Raspberry Pi came along that anything came close as a microcomputer to selling the numbers that the Commodore 64 did. Mm-hmm. Huge selling machine. So I'm not surprised at all that the 400 have sold out. They've got another 1,000 coming. Which I think they're on sale now, or pre-sale for delivery in Q2 of 2022. So again, navigating those supply chain issues to get that out there. And I've no doubt that they'll sell out as well. But for a lot of people, it's not about jumping about systems. It's about devotion and dedication to their platform of choice. Just as there were lots of ZX Spectrum fans devoted that wanted to get on the next, there are with the C64. And their focus is not just the hardware and the reimagining of the hardware. It's also about the community that surrounds it and their shared love of that platform and everything that goes with that. And I think for those people, that community is just as important as the hardware. The people are just as important as the hardware. And a community has definitely sprung up around the ZX Spectrum Next, and it has around the Mega 65.
Absolutely. You make an excellent point that people want to be part of whatever the most up-to-date version of the whatever their platform of choice is, and being a part of a community like the ZX Next community, I definitely see the appeal of that, feeling like you're part of a club that's bringing the ZX brand into this new generation, and being able to say you are part of that and you're an active member of that community. I'm sure the exact same thing is going on right now with the Mega 65. I don't discount that at all, and I don't fault those people at all either, even though this thing isn't for me. I think there is value. There's a tremendous amount of value in platforms like the ZX Next and the Mega 65, and I'm happy that those things exist for sure.
And there's also an element of hope. I mean, nobody's kidding themselves going, oh, I hope this becomes a Windows or an Apple Mac killer and becomes the next big thing. But it's just hope for their platform of choice to have a future and not be lost to the mists of nostalgia over time. Here's new hardware that's going to last for years. There's new stuff being developed for it. I can be a part of that whole movement and probably enjoy it for the rest of our lives, given the age that we are.
Sure.
So
absolutely.
I think there's an element of that involved as well. So when you take all that into mind, it's not necessarily money badly spent. It's not necessarily that expensive. It just depends what you're going to do with it. Are you going to be committed and dedicated to it? If so, you will get your money's worth, I think. So if you are listening and you backed the Mega 65, I'd like to know what your plans are for it. Why did you buy it? Why did you back it? Do you have buyer's remorse, as John might have done if he'd put his money down on it? let us know over on our subreddit. We'd love to hear.
Neil, our community question of the week last week was, are there any special purpose applications you're still using on your 8 or 16-bit micro? And we got some great answers, Neil. Looks like yes. The answer is a resounding yes. Subreddit user Headers D writes, I still use Pipe Dream on my Cambridge Z88. It's a surprisingly effective note-taking device. Neil, I have no idea what this thing is. Tell me, what is a Cambridge Z88?
Well, when you said Pipe Dream, I thought, well, that's a puzzle game, but obviously not. I'm not familiar with this piece of software. A Cambridge Z88 is a Z80-based computer. That's all I can tell you about it, John. Do you want me to look it up?
Okay. Sheepy Tina says, I listen to my own chiptune music on a Game Boy to make sure it sounds right on real hardware. Nice. Yeah, I think that's a great application.
There's nothing, no matter what you make in an emulator, there's nothing quite like the feeling of hearing it or seeing it on real hardware and making sure it actually behaves as it should. The Cambridge Z88 is a portable computer from 1987. Little keyboard with probably a 2 or 3 character row screen at the top. So one of those very, very little computers, almost like a super calculator, if you like, with a Z80.
Yeah, there's a Tandy computer, the TRS Model 100, I believe. That's right. It sounds similar to that.
Very much like that. So they're obviously using a piece of software called Pipe Dream on there to do what was it they said they did with Pipe Dream?
Note taking.
There you go.
And Headers did say, for bonus points, he gets to feel like Douglas Adams and really confuse the millennials who work for him. So there you go. And finally, Neil, Super Cruiser 5000 says, still use Amos to do some bodgy coding and bust out some pics with VistaPro on the A1200.
Oh, that's a good combination. VistaPro for your fractal landscapes, Amos for loading in the images or the animations, whatever you're doing with it. Not necessarily retro, because Amos is kind of still in development, albeit under a different name.
But I think that since he's using it on an 8 or 16-bit micro, it still counts.
True. Yeah.
All right, Neil. Our next question of the week for next week is, and I can't wait to read some of these responses. What should Atari do to salvage their brand? So please post your responses in the subreddit, and we'll read the top 3 most upvoted responses on the air next week.
Don't hold back. We'll turn off the profanity filter for this one.
This Week in Retro was presented by Neil from RMC and John Shawler. It was produced by me, Duncan Stiles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcaster, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/thisweekinretro to suggest and vote on stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you'd like to support the show, please check out the links to our Patreon and Ko-fi pages in the show notes or in the YouTube description. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.